had on fraud trends from what we can see. So three things I want to touch on, and then I'll turn over to my panelists. The first item is on contactless. So we have seen an increase in contactless volume, and for those of you that have stayed current on some of the press releases that Mastercard has done, if you haven't seen them, I'm encouraging you to go to the mastercard.com website, and you can see a lot of statistics that we have released on that. But we have seen a 40% growth in contactless transactions globally in the first quarter of 2020 alone. And 80% of the contactless transactions are under $25. That trend has only accelerated since the pandemic with what we're seeing. And, transactions under $25 are transactions that typically displace cash, right? And so this is something that is forcing all of us to make sure that we pay attention to those trends to make sure that we can detect fraud. As a result of this pandemic as well, and to facilitate safe and easy payments as retailers reopen in various parts of the world, we also increased contactless limits in
emerging threats and trends. Welcome, everybody. We're excited to join.
Considering AI, and when we're early, who builds the technology, who tests it, who uses it, who abuses it?
In fraud at the moment, it does not necessarily mean that fraud is not increasing. I think part of that is the result of this pandemic and how all of us working from home, including various sections of banks, how this is impacting the ability to report fraud. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to each of my panelists to talk about what they are seeing at a high level in their area. So Kurt, why don't we start with you?
Okay, thanks, Claire. I'm going to spend a few minutes talking to everybody around two sorts of things that we see on the merchant acquiring side of the business. One's a little bit general around merchant account takeover. Sometimes we refer to it as emulation or merchant ghosting. And the other is more a type of fraud that occurs. It is more like a portion of the merchant account takeover. So just in general, I think it's pretty self-explanatory that the purpose of the bad actors is to monetize them. whether it's through various kinds of fraud around merchant account takeover. The key thing is the bad guys don't do things just because it's fun. They do it because they want to make money on it. So I'll get back to that here in a second. But what are the types of fraud we see when merchant accounts are taken over? The most prominent one that we see on the acquiring side is refund fraud, where the bad guys are attempting to post refunds against mostly or most times it's some version of a prepaid card that is an anonymous card that is also typically tied to the ability to go to an ATM machine and cash out those funds as soon as they're posted by the issuing bank. The next most common is bin testing or bin attacks, where obviously the bad guys are doing whatever they can to validate whether cards are still in good standing or various other data elements on the card. And another version that we typically see when a merchant account is taken over, and it's very rare, but it does happen, is what we refer to as authorization reversal, where the bad guys attempt to insert an authorization reversal message, which equates to basically the same thing as increasing the open to buy or the amount that is available on the card that they're presenting that reversal for. Again, with the attempt or future attempt to be to go to the ATM or in some way monetize, go make immediate purchases, those sorts of things as fast as they can. So how does it happen? It's all about merchant credentials. When we talk about merchant account takeover, we're basically talking about two different sorts of things. We're talking about merchant credentials being used to emulate the merchant, sometimes through a completely different connection, different point of sale device, that sort of thing. So it may appear from a data element standpoint that it is indeed the same merchant. However, they're usually connecting in a different way. How do they get the credentials? It can be through the typical phishing, spear phishing sort of thing, where they, bad guys reach out to the merchants directly. They may purport to be their merchant acquirer or processor and attempt to convince the merchant to give up their credentials. It can actually even happen in the reverse direction from a contact center standpoint, where the bad guys can actually attempt to call into the acquirer purporting to be the merchant and control to verify the caller is actually who they are. That way, ultimately, they're just trying to get the other data elements they need to basically emulate as a merchant. Another version to watch out for is with merchants or customers that as they're upgrading their hardware, usually a terminal, they sell their old hardware on eBay, or they're getting rid of it for some reason and it's not actually cleared out. Or in some cases, as an FYI, many of us as acquirers usually have a sticker or a label on the side of a POS device that is usually there to help at the checkout if there's a problem with the POS, but sometimes if you put too much information on that label, such as their terminal ID or their merchant ID, or just help desk phone numbers and those sorts of things, then the bad guys can use that potentially to start the process of taking over the merchant credentials. The other one that we see, and we've seen actually more recent events, even on the refund fraud, is the actual compromising of the merchant. And what I mean by that is not just using the credential or the data to emulate the merchant, but actually compromising the merchant, not to steal card data, but to actually submit refund transactions and appear as if they are completely the merchant themselves. So in other words, the IP address, the connection is the merchant themselves. The merchant has basically taken over in its entirety the merchant. Very quickly on a bin attack standpoint, again, usually the merchant account credentials are taken over. It usually occurs as a result, at least from what we see, as a